Hello everyone, welcome back. We've got the grand final now of the Las Vegas ProQuest FanBoyThree. It's been a real banger of a ProQuest in my opinion. Have Marlyn in the finals, which I don't think many people would have expected. Piloted by the great George Jones, which everyone has had the pleasure of seeing their top 8 gauntlet, basically. They managed to harpoon their way through the quite a lot of decks actually, like Victor, Basilio, both decks that I would consider to be on different ends of the spectrum in terms of their gameplay. George manages to have quite a easy time into them. Really, it does help that his start's been very strong both ways. Having that three of a kind start, let's hope he gets that now in the final into Fraser. Fraser, another prolific UK player. You'll see him a lot if you frequent the Northern events a lot. Any of the PQs, RTNs. I believe last season's PQ for Yokohama, he was in the finals with Syndra. And now managing to do it with Kayo. He's also in the finals for a Sage PQ in the last weeks, where he lost out to Briar in the finals, playing KO again. So he seems to have moved from his draconic ways to KO. But it's clearly fared him very well, only losing once in this Swiss. Let's see if he's able to keep that score going. Just as a kind of breakdown of the matchup, if I do a bit more in depth while these players are getting themselves ready. The KO Marlyn matchup, I think, is probably in Marlyn's favour. I do think that KO has some ways of disrupting Marlyn. I think one of the issues that Marlyn has is that if the other deck has the capacity to present any relevant numbers or turns through disruption, it does make it quite hard for her, because realistically, with the amount of cards that she sees and uses, she doesn't quite present like the biggest numbers just by card value. She keeps a lot of cards in her hand that she has to hold on to through things like Three of a Kind. All of her buffs are usually +3s, and her harpoons, assuming that they're hammer-headed, are 10 without any other additional buffs of the like. 10 for free cards, not the best on rate. So a missed Go Fish trigger, or one that doesn't necessarily present enough of a disruptive element to a deck, can be quite an issue. KO having quite good 2-card hands in the form of your Bear Fangs or any of the 2-for-8s, the Swing Bigs, the Test of Strengths, could pose an issue. I know as well Fraser is playing No Fear in his deck, which should also be an issue for Marlyn, especially if they're able to set it up in their arsenal and protect their whole hand going into maybe like a Blood Rush. With the Blood Rush being generally protected unless George at the time is able to sniff it out and present a King Kraken Harpoon. That's the one. I'll remember that one. So I think this matchup realistically will come down to how quickly Fraser comes out the gate, how well George is able to disrupt Fraser's turns, and how well Fraser is able to pick his moments and subvert that disruption, either through using their armor well or the no fears. So I think that'll be the crux of this matchup realistically, and I think it will be the most interesting point. George also does have access to, as you're seeing here, the Trench of Watery Depths, as well as the Quicksilver, Quick Dodge Flexes, not Quicksilver Flexes, Quick Dodge Flexes, which as a combo is very strong. Seeing players draw up now, just as they deliberate their first turns, and I'll speak a bit more on it. Being able to get those free resources to convert those 2 pieces of equipment into 7 block, I believe the Trench blocks for 1. I might be wrong in that case, but if not, a free 6 block. George here managing to get first. I don't quite remember who was higher in the standings. But I think this might be a benefit to both players, with George being able to set up on his first turn, which is what he wants to do. The cycling his gold here, trying to set up a card to put in his arsenal, getting the King Shark Harpoon, which on the first turn of the game is realistically just damage and being able to select a particular card for George to take out of Fraser's hand, maybe one of the pearls being any of the cards that can't block, so things like Wild Ride, Bear Fangs, seeing a Wild Ride here in Fraser's hand. Not a bad turn 0 from George. I think this is the first time George has gone first. He's gone second both times and been able to rip off a 3 of a kind, so not this time. George subverting that now, but presenting an equally powerful turn here with 10 overpower. Taking Fraser down to 33 on the very first turn. So George now having an interesting decision about which card to take. I would say probably the Wild Ride, which is what he will do. Game 7 of a gold. Really strong start here from George, being able to pocket a Bluefin Harpoon if he would like for next turn. And setting Fraser back 7 damage and a go again source. Let's see. Oh, Fraser managing to rip off another go again off the top. 1 less damage, which could be relevant, as George has just remarked. Fraser here, forgetting to draw and discard. I'm hoping that the players are able to catch this. And if so, that is rectified. I was here. Obviously, I was recording all of this. But I was trying not to watch it as much as I could because I didn't want to be spoiled about the ending and everything. I wanted to see the game through the same eyes as you guys at the same time. George taking 5 here from the Wild Ride. No reason to really block this, wanting to present their cards practically. Seems like they're just catching it now, the lack of a draw. Here comes our Judge Cody. Yep, George exactly right there, saying you have to re-roll the discard. I think we're just gonna, considering George did not block and no additional information had been gained by other players, going to be an easy fix where we just start this Wild Ride up again, see where it goes. While this happens, I hope everyone's enjoying themselves, been enjoying the commentary and the top 8 in general, as well as the rest of the Swiss. I always like to do these. I tried once on my own account before we did all this Team Toxic stuff. I made some for the PK Yokohama. That was more of a test where I've been able to kind of improve everything a bit more. If you do like this kind of stuff and you'd like to see it going forward rather, make sure you subscribe. Please make sure that you're writing in the comments. Let me know what you'd like. I'd like to know if you'd like the commentary, if you're enjoying this part of it, or if you'd prefer just to hear the players, or if you do enjoy this kind of Swiss non-commentary into the top 8 commentary as things get a bit more serious. Fraser here just converting his hand from not a hugely powerful turn to pitching the swing being into the claw. Thinking about what he might have in arsenal here, as I don't think I saw it as I was on my content creator tirade. I think George quite happy to come out of this only 1 point below Fraser, going into his first proper turn of offense. Saying that like he didn't just deal 7 to Fraser turn 0, but here we are, starting with a 3 of a kind. George, absolute king of 3 of a kind. They don't call him the Demon Ranger for nothing. Rattling off a 3 of a kind, getting 1 buff. Definitely could be worse for Fraser if he was able to play a second buff, maybe a take aim, or actually not sure if George is even playing take aim in his list. I haven't seen it throughout the top 8. Any other buff realistically. Big Game Trophy Shop, another good one. Golden Tip, anything like that. It would probably be much worse for Fraser here, but still a very potent turn potentially for George here. We'll see how he's able to convert. We do know that there's a bluefin harpoon in his arsenal, so I'm not sure how George will be able to get that out of there without access to Trench of Sunken Depths. And as mentioned, he's just going to fire it off. So coming in for 11, I believe, with a blue go fish on it and a wager of a gold. 2 cards here in case Fraser wants to block us all out, so George is still able to discard to win the wager. I believe a Codex being one of the cards in his hand, so more than likely going to be the card that he'll arsenal. Very potent card to arsenal in Marlynn, as it's able to basically tutor any of the relevant harpoons you may want, as they are the cards that will be in your graveyard from when you've fired them or blocked with them previously, and also means that you have a very you have the capacity to draw, defend with the other 2 cards in your hand. So a very potent free card play, especially if you are able to have access to the new harpoon. That's what I always hope for. Who is in the pitch currently, whose name I still don't know. I'll get there eventually. I'm going to try and remember while Fraser deliberates blocking. I believe Fraser just blocking 5 here and resolving the trigger, seemingly blocking with this Savage Sash as they intend to use it this turn, revealing 2 Wild Rides and a Bare Fangs. Not a very good blocky hand for Fraser in general, so probably quite sad to have to lose his blue, as he was forced to lose it off of the Bluefin Harpoon, as otherwise George will be able to discard it for the Go Fish. So a good play by Fraser here to instead convert the Savage Sash into both allowing him to convert this hand into a respectable turn, while also taking that 2 value off of blocking, even if it didn't cover it up fully. Coming in for 7 go again here. He just discarded the Bare Fangs that we saw in his hand, so a random card in his hand and a card in arsenal. We'll see what his follow-up is here, with that being another Bare Fangs, which would explain why he pitched his swing big last turn. The reason he decided to arsenal the Bare Fangs instead was that it would mean that he had access to a card to draw and discard. Ooh, not ideal for Fraser here. Mentioning the draw and discard, swing big would have been much better here for him in this instance. Bare Fangs now only coming in for 6 and discarding probably one of the most important cards for Fraser in this matchup to be able to catch up to George and his current lead. We'll see how this affects the rest of this game. Fraser at the very least able to have an arsenal card. If it was a blue that he had kept, I don't think he would have been particularly happy. Something that can happen with Kayo, of course, with the amount of draw and discards and random effects that it does have. You are generally susceptible to that kind of thing on occasion. George here being able to crack back to Fraser with another King Shark Harpoon, obviously from the Codex. So same one, really. The extended out foil, very nice. Less nice for Fraser as it comes barreling towards him, itching to take one of the important either resource or offensive cards in his hand. One of the issues with Marlynn when you're trying to defend against these cards is that it's a bit of a damned if you do, damned if you don't. Assuming you only have 1 pitch card or 1 offensive card, they'll either take the best resource for you to prevent you from being able to correctly use your hand and pitch, or they'll take the best attack you have available if you have enough resources in your hand. So it really is a squeeze for a lot of decks, especially ones like Kayo where they all play one particular type of card. Like in this instance where he takes the red Buckwild as Fraser presents 2 blue cards, I believe. So not the best situation for Fraser here. Only able to come back to George with the 2 blues and the card in his arsenal, whatever that might be. Notably, however, all things considered, not a large life deficit, all things considering, with the first turn, George's lead there, George's continued pressure. Very nice. Fraser having a Buck Wild Red in his arsenal, so that was the card that he didn't discard off the Bear Fangs. All things considered in that regard, not a bad arsenal for Fraser, allowing him to convert this and now negate the frailty, just coming in for 7 go again, with the might cancelling out that frailty there. George, brave as always, taking the 7, hoping to use all of his cards offensively, not finding a reason to convert. Fraser, instead of sending a claw, just deciding to discard the Agile Wind-Up Blue to convert it into hopefully a palatable turn next turn. I think realizing that he had seen a lot of his wild rides and opting not to play Pulping by the looks of things, deciding not to chance the fact that he'll have a go again source in his hand, and instead deciding to set up for next turn, hoping that George's turn is not enough pressure, especially because he had clashed the test of strength from the vigorous wind up in the previous turn cycle. It means that he knows at the very least he'll be able to ideally send the 8 into maybe another 8, maybe a Bear Fangs, maybe another test of strength, something of that ilk. So he knows that the first card that he'll draw is not a go again. George here, absolutely loading up the buffs. Catch of the day, big game trophy shot. Activating his Gold Beta Tuck, knowing he's going to more than likely hit with this very large King Kraken Harpoon. Coming in for 16, I believe. Very large number. Oh, here I am. Coming in with the dice. No 16 on the dice, as I mentioned previously. So I believe instead we're opting for easier approach. Not sure where I got +6/+5 from there. George, much smarter than I am, instead putting a 10 and a 6 together. Outside assistance from me trying to make his harpoon 17 instead of 16. But yeah, 10 and a 6, much easier to present than +6/+5. So yeah, big 16 overpower coming at Fraser. More than 3/4 of Fraser's life here. Fraser not being able to find this no-fear that I mentioned previously. Let's see what he's able to do with his current hand. I would hope at the very least blocking a little bit. He does have access to 5 block in his fridge at the very least. So that means that he's able to potentially block this for at least, assuming he has only 2 blocks in his hand, which we know he doesn't. He has some free blocks, at least 8 or 7 rather, which would put him to 11, which is much better than 10 for the instance of a naked harpoon with hammerhead, which is 10. So it means that he does have access to maybe not blocking at one point in the game, should that come up. But it looks like Fraser only presenting the 1 card, hoping to keep his armor to block a full-on Go Fish on hit. Happily not finding a Blood Rush. I say happily in the instance that he would usually probably like a Blood Rush. George here just hoping to scope for 1. Showing the picking the cards for Go Fish, as you do have to select the card to the Go Fish trigger, even if It is not the card that you would have to find. So in this instance, even if it is a non-attack action, they still have to look at the card. So George, in his wisdom, decided to choose Savage Feast and then the yellow or the blue Buckle Wild. Another instance of Fraser thinking ahead here, which I think was good of him, discarding the Agile Wild Up, knowing that he has some sort of Savage Feast in his deck, so able to cycle out the card in his hand and come in for 7 here. Unfortunately for Fraser, though, I do believe that isn't maybe the best for him in the sense that he did have to discard a Test of Strength. But Fraser, unfazed by this, just knowing he would be blessed by the top of his deck and drawing a Swing Big instead. So still able to come in for a very respectable 7 into 8, even after George was able to present a very large number. But this is one of the issues that I was mentioning. The number, all things considered, for the amount of cards that George had in his hand and played was not that big. Fraser here able to do comparable damage, if not more. Actually, I think exactly the same. No, 15 damage here. I can do an amount of math. 15 damage here off of 3 cards, and leaving a might. So 16 value into George, while George was able to present 16 value themselves into Fraser and make Fraser block with a card. I think Fraser winning out this turn cycle altogether, but George still having a lot of blocking options in his equipment. Well, in the same sense, Fraser does too. George is cashing in some armor here, just in case his hook gets destroyed. He might go for a naked hook in which he hasn't made a gold and just does it so that Fraser feels incentivized to block with his equipment, which is something that Marlynn players will do. They will, when they feel that they don't need their hook anymore, just activate it on blockable damage, your 8s or your 10s. Things that you would usually not bother to use your hook for when you feel like you have enough gold. Ooh, very strong reciprocation. Reciprocation? That's not quite the right word here. Now that's a response. We'll just say response in this case. A great response from George going in with the Cheating Scoundrel into the Codex. But Fraser with an equally good response here, able to discard his whole hand to No Fear. Although, not the best hand to discard to No Fear here, with 3 blues in his that he's banished. I'm not sure on the window for No Fear, but I don't think this will even allow him to discard the Agile Windup. I could be wrong here. But one of the benefits of this for Fraser is he is able to get a card from Codex of Frailty into his arsenal without having to discard any additional cards. So No Fear here, blocking 5 and essentially drawing a card, which is quite good, actually, even if the rest of Fraser's hand is not very strong. George here getting the only card he could, the King Shark Harpoon. He would have much preferred the CNC Harpoon, whose name I have up. Shallow Water Shark Harpoon. No way I'm going to remember that. It's so long. Maybe if I say it enough, maybe if I cast enough Marlin games, I'll remember. But Shallow Water Shark would have been much more preferable for George, as he would have been able to destroy this Arsenal card from Fraser and allow Fraser to come in with quite a weak turn without it, I would say. Fraser still having access to trackers. I believe they are more than likely to try and cash them in on this turn, as they're deliberating between the Savage Feast and the Bare Fangs. Both having their merit. Bare Fangs being able to come in for ideally a 8 or 7 in the instance of Frailty, but 8 because of the might. So the might from Kayo's ability helping to subvert the lost value from Frailty. However, you would also just prefer it to be 9. We are eventually opting for the Bare Fangs, which makes sense to me. Bare Fangs making the most sense, allowing you to convert a random card, ideally, unless you discard the card off the top, which, as KO does, is possible. The Savage Feast would have been the safer play to definitely convert one of the blues in his hand to a random card off the top. However, I believe Fraser, in the position that he's currently in, opting more so for the highest value play, playing to win rather playing to not lose, going for the more volatile, less safe play, which I think is on theme for Kayo. Thinking about whether or not he needs to use his Crown of Providence or he'd rather use it later on. Something that actually is worth considering if George had access to the Shallow Water Shark. See, I got it there that time. Fraser would have been able to use his Crown of Providence to at the very least cycle that card into a card in his hand, which may or may not have been to Fraser's benefit, depending on the card that he drew. Fraser in worrying territory here onto, however, being able to come at George with essentially 4 cards, probably the only time he's been able to do that this game, I believe. Let's see how he's able to convert it. Unfortunately, being all blues outside of the Codex card is not ideal for Fraser. However, we'll see if this Bear Fangs is able to bail him out of that. Unfortunately for Fraser, not being able to get any value out of the Smashing Ground in his hand, the other blue that would have potentially, the one he just discarded. So hopefully the extra card that he drew is a red that he's able to present, but that card would have been good for him on any of the other turns when George was able to have an arsenal, when he had those codexes in his arsenal, as it has a CNC effect when it has above its base, which Fraser would have been able to buff using his gauntlets of Tyrannical Rex. Let's see, I believe Fraser has managed to find a Run Roughshod, which is a respectable card here. It allows him to go only 2, go again off of the claw because of the frailty, into the Run Roughshod, perhaps even with the gauntlets, to be a 6. But George, sniffing out the potential for multiple chains in this turn, has decided to cash in his Trench of Sunken Depths to allow him to acquire large amounts of value from his quick dodge flexes. Rather potent at these lower life totals when Fraser is able to finally convert into a respectable turn. Not to say that the others haven't been particularly respectable given the disruption circumstances, but this is probably the turn that Fraser really wanted to try and take the tempo and get cards out of George's hand. This quick dodge flex is allowing George to block as much as possible while still maintaining a large hand size to be able to cycle through their deck potentially to find a harpoon if they haven't got one already. Worst case, George is always able to activate Marlyn's ability and turn one of those gold into a harpoon to present a large amount of damage. 8, still very respectable, or 6 rather, with the Golfin Harpoon. Still very respectable when your opponent's on 2, especially when they're only really able to block, I would say 5 at most outside of a no fear. Notably though, that wouldn't kill. So Fraser, with the heads up play of keeping their Crown of Dominion. Or Providence, rather. Crown of Providence. Dominion's the one that George has. I believe Fraser here... Yeah, he uses his gauntlets. So he closes the chain to gauntlets the mandible for free to make the quick dodge flex's value less in theory, while this Run Roughshod coming in for 5. So good heads up play here by Fraser. I believe it would have ended up the same, unless George throws 2 cards into the Run Roughshod, but then he wouldn't be getting the additional block value off of the third resource from the quick dodge flexes anyway. So I think it doesn't really amount to anything regardless. But it does mean that George is able to know going into the next attack that what's coming is only a 1 cost rather than a 2 cost potentially. So maybe a misplay on Fraser's end here, but one that I don't think really matters, as George is probably not likely to block regardless, or try and block as little as possible. Blocking with the big game trophy shot in the on the first attack, as that is a card that is quite taxing to your hand, costing 2, requiring you to draw and discard. Costing 2 meaning that you realistically need at least 2 additional blues to the one that you pitched to allow you to fire most harpoons. Blocking with the third one here. Blocking 5 overall. George managing to shunt most of the damage on this turn, and coming into his turn with 6 gold. Starting off here with the goldfin harpoon, allowing George a harpoon, or access to a harpoon, going into the first crack of gold so that they can arsenal it should they find what they need, which I believe is probably just a buff of some kind at this point, which is exactly the case as it would seem, as they are just putting the goldfin harpoon in and firing off this harpoon for 9. 9, very awkward for Fraser, more than likely lethal here unless Fraser is able to find that no fear that we were speaking about. He's found 1. I believe he's only playing 2 in his deck. The Crown of Providence, allowing him to have 1 more shot, as there isn't one in his hand by the looks of things. He has 1 more look in his deck. 1 more chance to present a relevant amount of damage to George in the next turn. Fraser praying the top of his deck gives him what he needs. Fraser thinking about what he needs to find, what will allow him to survive this turn. Fraser rubbing the top of his deck for good luck. Will it be the no fear? Or will it be George's victory? Well done to George, getting his invite to Las Vegas and a sweet, sweet gold foil, which will open right now. See what George gets hit. I am privy to the information, as I recorded, obviously. I believe things he was hoping for would be any of the generic Ranger ones, any of the Assassin ones. Ending up getting an Unflinching Foothold, which is a very good Sage playable generic gold foil. A new one as well. It's very nice. Thank you all for watching. See you later.